Welcome to this WiseOwl Report Builder tutorial. In this video we're going to explain how to use indicators in a matrix. We'll start with a quick recap of creating a basic matrix and then show how to add an indicator to that matrix, including how to choose an icon set and then assign a field for the indicator to display. We'll give you a quick description of how Report Builder decides which icon to display by default, and then show you how you can set your own custom numeric bands for your indicators. Have a quick look at formatting the icons, and then how to add a total row and a total column. So let's get started. Here's an idea of the type of report we'll create in this video. This matrix shows the average runtime in minutes of films, grouped by which genre the film belongs to and which certificate was awarded to them. The indicator in each cell uses a set of 5 different coloured in circles, the idea being that the more filled in the circle becomes, the longer the average runtime that represents. We've got a similar system for the row totals, so we can compare the individual genres against each other, and again the same system is in place, so the more filled in the circle, the longer the average runtime, and a similar system for the column totals at the bottom to show the longest certificates on average. If you'd like to follow along and create the same example I'm creating here, you'll need a copy of the WiseOwl Movies database, and this video explains how you can get that one set up, and there's a link in that video's description you can use to download any files you'll need. Assuming you've done that part already, I've got a brand new blank report builder report waiting for me, so let's get started with connecting to that database. To begin, I'll right click on the Data Sources folder and choose Add Data Source. I'll call this one Movies, and then use a connection embedded in the report, pointing to a Microsoft SQL Server. I'll click the Build button to get some help with the connection string, type in a full stop and a backslash to point to my local host, and then the name of the instance of SQL Server I'm using, which is SQL 2017. From there I'll select my Movies database from the drop-down list, and then click OK a couple of times to create the data source. Next I can right-click on the data source and choose Add Dataset. I'll call this one Films, and then I'll use the Query Designer to help me build up the select statement. I'll select fields from several different tables here. So from the Tables folder, I'll start in the Certificate table, and I'll pick both the Certificate ID, that's what I'm going to use to perform the grouping in the matrix. Then I'll also include the certificate, which is the value that I'll display in the matrix so the user can read something sensible. I'll do a similar thing for the Genre table. I'll pick both the Genre ID and the genre. And then from the Film table, I'll pick just the runtime minutes, but that's what we'll take the average of. From there I can click OK a couple more times, and there's my dataset created. Next I can set up the basic matrix. To start with, I'll tidy up my report by removing the page footer and getting rid of this placeholder title text box. Then I'll right click somewhere in the body of the report and choose to insert a matrix. I'll assign a value to the rows group first of all, so I'll use the field selector to pick the genre ID field. So that will set the grouping that's used. I'm going to group on the ID number rather than on the longer string of text for the genre name. But of course I want to display to the user the genre name, so having grouped by genre ID, I can then use the field selector to replace that with the genre, but that doesn't affect the grouping that's just been created. I'd also like that column to be sorted alphabetically by the genre name, so to change that I can right click on the group that's being created in the row groups area, choose Group Properties, and then on the sorting page change the sort from genre ID to genre. I can then do something similar for the certificate ID, so I can go to the columns area and then select the certificate ID field first. That will set up the column grouping to use that field. But of course I want the user to be able to read the certificate name, so I can use the field selector again and just pick the certificate field. I'm going to leave the sorting based on the certificate ID, so I don't want to sort it alphabetically by certificate name, so I'll leave the sorting as is. Next I can choose what value I want to display in the data cell, so I can use the field selector there to pick the runtime minutes. That will automatically apply a sum function to that, but what I really want is an average. So I can click on the sum and then right click on that and choose Summarize by AVG. Having done that, I'm just going to run the report at this point to see what it looks like. I suspect I'm probably going to miss a bunch of the text out of the matrix. We'll probably encounter our font rendering bug. You may have encountered this yourself. So I've got some missing rows here. There are no values displayed for whatever genres should be displayed there. There are no column headings. So a quick way to solve that back in the design view is to highlight all of the cells in the matrix and then simply switch away from the default font and then back to the default font, and that will ensure that the next time we run the report we'll see everything again. So we see those missing genres that were previously hidden. I would like to sort out the number formatting as well. I want to reduce these numbers down to 2 decimal places, and a fairly simple way to do that is back in the design view. If I select the average runtime minutes cell, use the drop-down list at the top here to choose the number format. I'll just move my matrix up to the top left-hand corner of the report page, and I'll also just change the column width of the genre column so that it looks, I can read the entire genre on one row. Maybe just change the column header there as well to say genre rather than genre ID, and then run the report one more time, and that looks a little bit neater. Before I can add my indicator, I need to create some space into which I can insert it. Now, while it is possible to insert multiple items into the same cell in a matrix by using a rectangle, I find that a little bit fiddly personally. So what I'm going to do is insert a second column for each detail cell so that we have 2 different boxes for each combination of genre and certificate. So to do that, I'm going to go back to the design view, and then I'm going to right click on the cell containing the average runtime minutes and choose Insert Column. Now, it's quite important that we choose to insert this column inside the group, so we want this to belong to the certificate and genre group, so I'll choose Inside Group to the right. And what you might be able to see there is we've got a pair of cells underneath each individual certificate heading. It's probably easier to see if I centre the certificate name there and then run the report again, and we can see that each certificate now has 2 different cells available. Now that we have some space available, let's head back to the design view and insert an indicator into that cell. So I'm going to right click into the cell first, and then choose Insert, and then choose Indicator. We then have to pick a set of indicator icons to use. Again, don't worry, you're not stuck with this choice. You can change everything about your indicators at a later stage. For now, it's just picking a default set of icons you want to use. I'm going to go with the same set that I showed you in the introduction to this video. So I'll go with the 5/4 group and then click OK. And it will look as though we have a set of indicators already displayed. A graphical icon will appear in that cell. But if you've watched the previous couple of videos in this series, you'll know that that's a little bit misleading, because when we run the report now, we just see a completely empty blank column. To actually display the indicator, we have to tell it which field or value we want it to represent. So to do that, we can head back to the design view. We can click on the indicator once, and that will select the gauge panel which the indicator sits within. To select the indicator, we simply need to click on the icon again, and that will select the indicator itself. We then also expose the gauge data panel with an option to choose which field the indicator should display. It's currently set to unspecified. If I click on the drop-down arrow next to unspecified, I can then select any of the fields from that field list. I'll go with runtime minutes. And again, you can see, just as we did when we inserted the runtime minutes into the cell in the matrix initially, it's set to a sum of runtime minutes by default. To change it this time, we can click on the drop-down arrow and then choose the aggregate option, and then change that to display an average instead. Once we've done that, we can run the report, and this time we will see a different indicator in each cell representing the relative length of the average runtime for films in that particular combination of genre and certificate. By default, Report Builder uses percentages to work out which icon to display next to which number. I've picked a set of icons with 5 different thresholds, or 5 different bands, so any values which fall within the first 20% of average runtimes get the empty circle, anything in the next 20% gets the quarter circle, and so on. If you want to work out the exact points at which the bands change, you can calculate the thresholds for that, providing you know the minimum and the maximum values for the average runtimes over the entire matrix. So I could find the minimum average runtime, which is 78 for the horror movies in the PG certificate, and the maximum average runtime was 183 for the war movies with the 12 certificate. If I know those, I can use some basic arithmetic. Here's a simple Excel worksheet just to demonstrate the principle. The minimum value and the maximum values entered here. The range then is calculated by subtracting the minimum from the maximum. And once you've calculated the range, you can divide that by the number of bands to calculate the interval of each band. We know the minimum value, that's 78, so if we have a value of 78 for the average runtime, we're going to get the empty circle. If we add 21 to that, we'll get the beginning of the next band, and that will give you the quarter-filled circle. Add 21 more to that, you'll get the half-filled circle, and so on until you reach the maximum possible value. So you can compare those values there with the icons that we've shown in the matrix, just to show that that's how the information is calculated. If you didn't want to use Report Builder's default way of calculating which icon appears next to which number, you can set your own thresholds and bands manually. Let's say, for example, in this set of data we wanted to show the empty circle from 0 up to and including 100. Band 2, the quarter circle, would be 100 to 125, then the next band would be 125 to 150, and so on. To change that, we can head back to the design view of the report, and then right-click on the cell containing the indicator and choose Indicator Properties. On the dialog box which appears, we can head to the Value and States page, and this shows you how the current values and the current icons are being calculated. So we're using a percentage measurement unit, and the first 20% of values gets the empty circle, and so on, as we've already described. We can change the percentages used if we wanted to, but it's probably easier in this case because we want to use precise, specific numeric values to change percentage to numeric first. And then we can set the actual values for the average runtime. So for example, the first band would be from 0 to exactly 100. The next band, I'll start that at 100 and then go up to 125. You'll notice that we're overlapping the end of one band for the start of the next, and that's because, of course, we're using decimal values in our matrix. If we set the start of band 2 to be 101, we wouldn't capture the values which fall between 100 and 101. So we'll overlap the bands in the same way the Report Builder does automatically. We can then, hopefully relatively quickly, fill in the rest of these bands, so that would be 125 to 150, 150 to 175. And then for the final band, we'll begin at 175, but we might not know what the maximum value would be, so the simplest thing to do here is just leave that box empty. While we're on this dialog box, we can also change the colour and the icon used for each different band in a fairly obvious way. Let's say for the lowest number we wanted to use a different colour to indicate that it was in the lowest band. Let's go with orange. And having done that, we can also change the icon that we're using. So we're not limited to the original selection we made earlier on. We can mix and match from any icon set and even pick different icons that we didn't have access to when we first created the indicator. There's also an option to import your own custom images, which is what we covered in the previous video. So for this example, let's go with the sad face for the lowest numbers, and then I'll go for a different colour for the highest numbers. Let's go with aqua, and then I'll change that to the happy smiley face. And then it's a little bit silly, I appreciate, but just to demonstrate what's possible, if we then click OK and run the report, we'll see our new indicators are used with sad faces and smiley faces, but now according to the specific numeric thresholds that we've set ourselves. Next, let's add a column to the end of the matrix which will display the overall average runtime for all the films in a genre, regardless of which certificate was assigned to it. Let's head back to the design view, and we can right-click on the cell containing the average runtime minutes, choose Add Total, and then go for Column. So you'll see that we get a new column inserted outside of the certificate group, showing the same statistic, the average runtime minutes. Just going to change the column widths of the average runtime and the indicator cell for a moment so we can see everything a little more clearly. And then when we run the report, we'll see that grand average sitting at the end of the matrix. Now let's add a new column to display an indicator next to that total column. We'll head back to the design view, and I can right-click on the cell in the total column containing the average runtime minutes. I can then choose Insert Column. We don't need to pick whether this is inside or outside a group this time because, well, we're not in a group, so we can just choose Right, and then we could right-click and insert a new indicator, choose a set of default icons, assign the field to it, and then change all the banding and the colours and the icons. But if all that sounds like a lot of effort, I agree, it is. So let's just click on the cell that contains our current indicator. We can press Ctrl and C to copy that, click into our new cell and press Ctrl and V to paste it. Once we've done that, we can run the report, And we'll see, using the same banding system we've already set up and the same colours and icons, we get our new indicators representing the average runtime for the entire genre. You'll notice that because we've used specific numeric bands now, if any values don't fall within those numeric bands, so the aqua smiley face, which only appears for values of 175 or upwards, that one doesn't appear at all. We can then take the same basic approach to create a total row at the bottom of the matrix. Let's head back to the design view. We can right-click on the original average runtime cell, choose Add Total, and this time choose Row. Then again we get the average runtime displayed for us automatically. Next I'd like to copy the indicator, so I'll go back to the detail cell into which we inserted our indicator, press Ctrl and C to copy, click into our new cell and press Ctrl and V to paste. If we run the report at that point, we'll see a total row, or a grand average row is what it should really say, I suppose, the average runtime for all the films in each certificate with the corresponding indicator displayed. If we wanted to add a grand average for the entire matrix in the bottom right hand corner, although it doesn't appear for us automatically, it's fairly easy to add in ourselves. So let's head back to the design view, identify the cell that we want to hold the average runtime for the entire matrix, and then from the field selector, simply pick runtime minutes. We can then click on the word sum, right click on that, and choose summarize by AVG instead. We'll then select that cell and apply some basic number formatting to that to make sure we don't get the ridiculous number of decimal places. And if we wanted to display an indicator as well, we can just copy any of our previous indicators and paste that into the available cell next door. And a final run of that report at this point then will give us the grand average for the entire matrix and the appropriate indicator to match that particular band of numbers. Next, I'd just like to change some of the basic formatting properties of these cells to make it appear as though the number and the indicator belong to the same cell. So I want to get rid of the right-hand border from the number cell and add a bottom border to the indicator cell. Back in the design view, there are several different ways I can do this, but here's the approach I'm going to take. I'll start by selecting the cell containing the average runtime minutes for the detail cell in the matrix, and then click the dialog box launcher in the border group on the home tab of the ribbon. So that will take me straight to the dialog box, which allows me to manipulate the borders, shows me what colour is currently being used, and allows me to quickly and easily deactivate the right-hand border by just clicking on that button there. I can then click OK and then do the same or a similar thing to the indicator cell. If I select that first, click the dialog box launcher, and then just make sure I click on the button to add the bottom border to that cell using the same colour. If I then click OK and run the report again, that should make it look as though the number and the indicator belong to the same cell. We can do something similar now to control the formatting of the cells in the total column and the total row. I'm going to start by merging these two header cells together, the total and the empty cell next to it. So let's head back to the design view, and I can select those two cells and then click the merge button to put those into one single cell. Then I'd like to get rid of all of the borders from all of the cells in that column. So I'm just going to click and drag on all four cells there. And to change the borders or take away the borders, the easiest thing to do is to use the drop-down arrow next to the border button and choose None. What I'd then like to do is use some different colours to control how this looks. It looks a little bit odd now, I think, if I run the report. It's a little tricky to see. So I'm going to use some background colours to make this a little more readable. Back in the design view, I'm going to highlight the entire header row first and set a fairly dark blue background colour for that, and a lighter font colour, and maybe make the font bold. And then I'm going to highlight these two cells for the genre average runtime and its indicator, and set a slightly lighter blue background colour for that, and also make the font of the average runtime bold. I'll just change the column width a little bit as well to make it a little easier to read. And if I run the report now, I think that's a little bit more viewable. I'm sure you can create far better formatting options than I can. This is not my forte, as you will know if you've watched any of my previous videos, but just to give you a basic idea. Back to the design view, let's do something similar for the total row at the bottom. I'll select the total cell first, and then I'm going to apply the dark colour to that and the light font colour and make that bold. And then I will select these two cells. In fact, let's select all the cells on that row and get rid of all of the borders from those by clicking the non-border option. For the bottom right-hand corner, I'm going to use the dark blue background colour, and then again I'll use the light font colour and make the font bold. And then once again, for the average runtime for the certificates, I'll use the slightly lighter blue background colour and make the font of the average bold as well. So it will not look beautiful by any means, but it will look a little more readable, I think, than it looked before. That's not too bad. So there we go, that's how you add an indicator to a matrix and control which icon appears next to which range of numbers. As I say, I'm sure you can create far more attractive results than the one I've come up with here, but hopefully that's enough to give you the basic principles on which you can build. Thanks very much for watching, see you next time.